Welcome into an episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. No Alan Saunders today. Derek Bell joining me. Derek, what's going on, pal?
Chilling, man. Hope everybody's enjoying the elongated holiday weekend. Yeah, Alan, I'm sure he's out there working. He might be enjoying some sun. Smitty's got the cutoff on. He's sun's out, guns out. It's flexing on him a little bit. But yeah,
Yeah.
excited to be on here. Talk some ball. It's been an interesting first week of OTAs, and I feel like we got a lot to talk about.
We do. We do have a lot to talk about. I want to start first and foremost. Derek, you had an exclusive interview with Steelers linebacker Patrick Queen up on your channel. I will throw the link to that conversation in the description. If you guys haven't checked it out yet, please go check it out after you wrap up this episode. But Derek, one thing that I wanted to talk about, and I feel like everybody, Ravens fans really specifically has questions about how he's going to transition away from Roquan Smith. Now came into the league as a young player, didn't figure it out right away. They make the big trade for Roquan Smith to pair with Patrick Queen. Patrick Queen turned into a really good player, even became an all-pro last season before signing this deal now to come to Pittsburgh. And Ravens fans have kind of brought that up. Steelers fans have pushed back on that. You've obviously done a ton of film study on Patrick Queen and then had a conversation with him. So what in your mind can we expect from Patrick Queen, obviously now taking on more of a role with the Steelers and trying to be what Roquan was in Baltimore, now on his own in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, I understand some of the narrative, but I think a lot of it just requires a lot more further context than what's really been given out. You know what I'm saying? So, they make the
Mhm.
trade for Roquan, who's a fantastic player. I don't want to take anything away from him on his own either. Like they make the trade for him, and then kind of in that same kind of time frame is when Patrick Queen just started kind of blowing up, playing extremely good ball. Later into the second half of his third season. But I think there's like some things that people are missing in terms of like some of his early career, kind of struggles and what took him a little bit to kind of figure things out. Is he only had a handful of starts in college at LSU, so that was one of the things. He came in super inexperienced. That was also the COVID draft, so you got to think all the guys that were drafted in 2020, they didn't get the full offseason program that a lot of other classes, every other class is going to get. And then he was, playing in an extremely difficult system for inside linebackers and Wink Martindale's system. And like he spoke in my interview with him about just some of the details that were missing in terms of their position group and how things were being taught and things that they were asking them to do. But just in general, like he was one of the youngest players to ever debut in the NFL. He was 20 years old. So, I mean, you got to think about where he was on his development path. You make your debut so early and he's not physically ready, in terms of like, learning how to fit power, right? And he talked about, things such as, just having to deal with more route concepts, like playing the mic, like in terms of reading 3-man route concepts and things of that nature. There's just a lot more that goes into the position, I feel like, than that people are really giving credit to. And it would be one thing for me, if he was, 25, 26 years old and Roquan came in and then all of a sudden Queen looks like a completely different dude. But he
Mhm.
was into his third season. I mean, how often does Mike Tomlin talk about the jump that he expects guys to make in year two, or the jump he expects guys to make in year three? You know what I'm saying? And then you add in the fact that he was one of the youngest rookies ever. This is just a normal development path. I feel like for a lot of people, the dude was quote unquote breaking out at 22, 23 years old. Like that's typically what happens. You know what I'm saying? I mean, some of these guys that are drafted in this past class are going to come in and they'll never play an NFL game before they're 23 years old. So it's just the context there is really missing. And, some of that's just from Ravens fans being salty that he ended up signing in Pittsburgh, which I get that from a fan perspective. I mean, it's going to be tough to watch that for them, but I don't have some of the same concerns, I feel like, as some of the other people do.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point. And that's what we talked about. And we were also discussing right before we started recording. You look at recent memory and the linebackers that have been taken early, it might have turned into good players down the line, or maybe in some cases not. But
Sure.
how many of them were even good right out of the gate? I mean, how far do we have to go back to find an off-ball linebacker that was legitimately good from day one coming into the NFL?
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, you and I were sitting there kind of reminiscing on some of these draft misses in recent seasons. I mean, you look at I think about Devin Bush, Devin White, both those guys,
Mhm.
things didn't really particularly work out in their first stints. They're playing elsewhere now. I mean, some of the other guys that got drafted in the first round that just have never panned out, like Jamin Davis. You think of Isaiah Simmons from the Cardinals. He's already with a different team too. So it's just Zaven Collins again from Arizona. So it's just there's a lot that goes into the position. I think one, the position is one of the more difficult, in my opinion, in terms of translating from college to the next level. And I've talked about this a little bit in regards to Peyton Wilson and some of the context I think is necessary there. But I think really, some of the things that you're asked to do is just a lot more complex. I think a lot of people really give credence to. You know what I'm saying? Like, for
Yeah.
example, if you're playing in the middle, you may have on one play you're gonna be playing like outside zone, and you're gonna have to track the back, and then the very next play they're gonna run some bootleg off of that, and then you have to acknowledge the run fake but then turn around and robot over and find the crosser in the intermediate area to where you take that throw away from the quarterback on the run. It's just coordinators have gotten so good at putting so much stress on the second level guys. You have to be able to play the run. You got to be able to take on blocks, deconstruct blocks at the point of attack. You got to be able to play in pass coverage, identify and read multiple, 2-3 man route concepts. It's just a lot more difficult. And it takes guys a little bit to get used to. But I think if you're patient and you bet on guys with, those high end traits like Queen has, the athleticism, the range, the physicality, I think if you bet on those type of guys, the reward is definitely there if you're patient.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm excited to see how it plays out. And, obviously it's not Roquan, but you look at, the Steelers defense, specifically in that linebacker room too, like you're still going to be having a solid supporting cast for Patrick Queen to play with. So, even if he isn't a guy that people think like can carry the torch on his own, he's not going to have to be within the
Sure.
Steelers defense.
I actually really love I mean, I think you and I have probably talked about this in recent months, but I actually really love the pairing with him and Landon Roberts. Like, I
Yeah.
just think
Hmm.
he's not Roquan and obviously a completely different player, but you think about the things that Roberts does extremely well, coming downhill in that thumper roll. He's extremely good against power. He wants to play with physicality. He will take on blocks at the point of attack. And that can do some things in terms of allowing him to kind of use his speed, use his range, to kind of spill over things. And I'm excited about what that's going to look like. I also think, as it relates to, some of the guys that they got in the room, we'll see what happens with Cole Holcomb if he gets back from, injury or whatever. But I think you look at, Peyton Wilson, you look at Patrick Queen, you look at Landon Roberts, those guys are all really good blitzers too. So I think it really opens up a lot of, interesting, hypotheticals on what you can do from a simulated pressure standpoint, what you can do if you get some of these teams backed up in third and long. Maybe there's a chance for, Peyton Wilson to break into some of those sub package formations. I don't think he's going to play a ton early on, but we'll see. I mean, he is an older rookie who was asked to, call the defense at NC State. And even if he doesn't, I mean, the Steelers had tons of injuries last year. So you need depth at that position. But I think that there's just a lot of possibilities in terms of what you can do with these guys. And I kind of like how some of the stylistic, differences kind of play off one another.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the timeline is, but there's actually a story up today, just a little bit ago by Chris Ward, Steelers Now, and this is from Brian Batko, though, with a conversation that he had with Cole Holcomb, and Cole basically told him, there's nothing to worry about in terms of his availability. I've dealt with injuries before. I'm not at all worried or anything like that. I know that I'll come back and I'll play football. They've been very mum on the situation, but,
Right.
Tomlin said that he was progressing. Omar said he's progressing. Like, when are we going to see him? I don't know. Could it be? I wouldn't expect OTAs, starting
Right.
tomorrow for the final week. We'll see about, mandatory camp, or I'm sorry, mini camp. And then obviously with training camp at the end of July, that will obviously be a big indicator, especially if he's not on the field back by then. But we'll see. Again, go check out Derrick's conversation with Patrick Queen. I will put the link to that if you missed it already. But it was a great conversation, so be sure to go check that out. Derrick, the rest of this episode, we want to take some questions from X. Of course, as we always like to do a little bit of mailbag. Hayden says, chances the Steelers acquiring a legit wide receiver 2 before week 1, and if they don't, who will have the most receiving yards between Wilson, Austin, and Freiermuth?
Man, this is a frequent question, I feel like, from a lot of people.
The first part specifically, yeah. I mean, there
Yeah,
honestly might be multiple people that ask basically the same question in here.
yeah. This was like, I think I did my own kind of mailbag over the weekend, and this was a heavy
Yeah.
heavy topic of conversation, and for good reason, right? Like you look at the depth chart, there's obviously concerns
Hmm.
in terms of like the receiving room without Deontay Johnson. I am still going to believe that the Steelers are going to be extremely inquisitive about trying to approach basically anyone who will listen about like, hey, do you have a veteran receiver for trade? Like, is there anyone that we can
Yeah.
acquire? I think that they're going to try to get a second receiving option, someone who's a little bit more proven, especially someone who can play outside. I just don't know if they're going to be successful, man. Like it it's one of the more unfortunate parts of this whole thing is, I think the Steelers have shown that they're willing to try to engage in trade conversations. They've had some discussions with some free agents. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about trades, it takes two to tango. You got to get a general manager to agree to put somebody on the market.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how many reasonable upgrades there are that are available. You know what I'm saying? And I'm curious on if, I think all the names have been exhausted. I mean, we've talked about every single name I feel like potentially
Hmm.
available. Is there any that stick out to you in terms of, guys that might be available that you would like to see them target as things kind of get closer to training camp?
Juwan Jennings in San
Okay.
Fran.
I
I
think that
think
makes a
if
lot
they're
of
not
sense.
gonna, yeah, if they're not gonna do the Ayuk thing, and honestly, if I'm San Fran, I wouldn't. I would pay him and look for a way
Hmm.
to move on from Debo after this season. But they did, draft two receivers as well, Ricky Pearsall and Jacob
Jacob
Cowing out of
Cowing.
Arizona
Yep.
as well. So like something's got to give in the receiver room, regardless. If it's not Brandon Ayuk, maybe it's Jennings looking for a bigger role because I think he's a legit, at least three receiving option. Now
Oh, yeah.
with what they've added, he's not going to be that in San Fran, at least long term. It's going to maybe take Pearsall some time, although I do think he is pretty much pro ready. Could take some time to get his feet wet there before he's fully ready to go in that system. But I just think he's a guy deserving of an expanded role. And if he's hasn't been at OTAs either, along with Ayuk, so
That's
maybe
interesting.
there's something to give there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know Jennings has been another guy that's kind of, been talked about a little bit. The thing with Jennings, man, is, opportunity just has not been there for him. He's
Hmm.
been playing in that loaded receiver room really since he was drafted. You look at some of the guys that have been there. I mean, we talk about how they got the death lineup over there. They got CMC, they got Debo, they got IU, they got Kittle, all these different guys, and he's kind of been the fifth or sixth option. But I think you've seen some flashes of when he's gotten the chance to do more.
Hmm.
You've seen him really make an impact, and he's still a guy who's really young. He's going to be 27 this year, I think. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely
Also,
some
probably the
potential there.
best, if not, he's close to the best blocking receiver in the league.
Oh yeah,
I mean, you're telling me Arthur Smith and Zach Dezzani don't want to get their hands on that guy? They'd
yeah,
love him here.
yeah. I mean, I think you look at the size too. Like some of the guys that Arthur Smith has kind of used, and some of those Z roll formations. Just I think they got him listed. I don't know how accurate this is, but 6'3", 210. I mean, I know he's a really big dude. You mentioned the physicality, the willingness to block. That would
Hmm.
definitely intrigue me. And I was kind of watching. I think it was Thursday or Friday of last week. I was watching an Atlanta game again, and I was just noticing like how many different ways I was looking at their like wind back counter stuff and how many different ways they were using the kind of the Z receiver in terms of like inserting into the formation, coming across the formation, kicking out the M man on line of scrimmage, or leading guys straight up through the hole. It's difficult to imagine that the Steelers had that guy on the roster, right? Like typically, like Pickens is a pretty solid blocker, but I think we all probably acknowledge that he's going to be the X. Who's the bigger bodied guy that's going to do that right now? Is that Van Jefferson? Well, potentially, but he didn't do that last year in Atlanta. They had other guys do it.
Yeah.
Matt
Hmm.
Collins did it, so
Yeah.
that's going to be a little bit different. I think we've all pointed out that Rowan Wilson, has the right attitude in terms of being a blocker, but it's difficult to imagine him splitting across the formation and kicking out edge defenders or like leading the guy through the hole just because he has some size limitations at 5'10", 180. So
Hmm.
I do think adding another bigger body type like that would make sense for the reasons that you mentioned.
I wonder too. He's not a guy that we've talked about as like he's certainly not a short thing to make the roster. I feel like he's on the outside looking in. But
Sure.
like, say that he has a great camp. What about Denzel Mims?
Yeah. Could be. I know Mims is. what's Mims' way? I always feel like I associate him with being like kind of like rail skinny. I actually really liked Mims coming out of college too. He
Me
was he
too.
was a miss for me.
Yep.
But yeah, I
Yep.
mean that's a good point. The thing that you mentioned though that I think is really important is it's wide open. Really, I mean
He's
you could
six.
use
He's 6'3", 207. That's what he's listed
okay,
at.
yeah. So maybe he's more built than I gave him credit for. I mean, I think too. You make a good point just in general about the training camp aspect of the receivers and how things are going to play out. It's
Hmm.
wide open. So after George Pickens, I think personally every spot is up for grabs. Like there's probably
Hmm.
not a single player on the roster right now at the receiver spot that is a quote unquote lock. And I think that that's going to make training camp, even if they don't acquire a wide receiver too, which would be a little bit disappointing in my eyes. I think it would be cool to see like all these different guys get their chances to shine. And who comes out the top. I think that could be a cool storyline. But as far as like the second part of his question, I think you and I are probably on the same page. If they don't make a move, I think Freiermuth is going to end up being the second leading receiver. I think the
Yeah.
ways that they're going to move him around and how much he's going to be featured in the passing game, it's difficult. I wouldn't say it's a lock, but it's difficult for me to imagine a scenario where he's not, aside from him just not being healthy. Just because I think he's clearly the second most talented guy in the room behind Pickens. And I just think that, I mean, I've watched pretty much every game that Arthur Smith coached in Atlanta at this point. So I know how the tight end's going to be used, and it's difficult for me to imagine him not having a good season if he's healthy.
Yeah, I mean, with the way that they're going to move him around, like we're talking about another option on the boundary right now, it could be him, and you have Darnell
Right.
stay in line and Freiermuth out on the outside. Like, yeah, they're going to use him in so many different ways. I'm fully on board with you that I think as of right now, he's the number 2 guy in targets, he's the number 2 guy in receptions, he's the number 2 guy in yardage, might be the number 1 guy in terms of touchdowns at the end of the season with the way that I'm looking at this. So, we will see how that shakes out. Obviously, I do want to say this conversation could be even different within like a week's time. We know that there are a lot of like post June 1 guys that they can maybe sniff around
Sure.
on. So this is obviously going to be a conversation for as long as, the Steelers do not add a receiver.
Sure.
But I'm curious to see how it plays out, as we continue to go on.
And and you
Uh,
mentioned and you
but
mentioned the post June 1 stuff, but like training
yeah.
camp cuts in general, like as the roster start to
Hmm.
cut down, like there will be guys that I know I've kind of led this answer to your question up with, hey, we've talked about just about every guy, but like there will be someone that gets cut like at the end of training camp when everybody has to go down to 53 guys. There will be somebody that gets cut that me, you, anybody in the content creation / media spectrum has talked about. So like it's going to
Yeah.
be
I
a
mean,
topic
look at
of conversation.
Houston's receiving core. Like something's got
Yeah,
to give with the Texans. They've
yeah,
added every
100%.
receiver.
Yeah,
So
we get Noah Brown on the free agency market again. If things don't, like if he's the odd man out in Houston, I'll backflip and we'll put it up on the
why they
channel.
even I mean, I know that they couldn't have known the way that things were going to play out, but like in hindsight, bringing him like his decision to re-sign there, not their
Oh, I
decision to
know.
bring him back, because like get as many good players as you can. But for
Yeah,
him, like he just signed up for it to have even less
I'd be
opportunity.
ticked, man. I'd be ticked if I was
Yeah.
him.
Signed up for even less opportunity than last year. Basically in the same vein here, so we don't need to regurgitate stuff. Minka's Goat said, do you guys think we'll have a new wide receiver too before the season starts? I guess I didn't necessarily give a prediction. I do think they're going to add a receiver at some point in terms of what that looks like. Let me kind of add to this though about just the depth chart for the receivers in general. And I kind of brought this up, but I do 8 podcasts a week. I don't even know if it was on here or on Around the 412 where I talk about this, so I'll regurgitate it. What I like about the situation on the bottom end of the depth chart is they've brought in guys like Quez Watkins, Scotty Miller that can kind of push Calvin Austin, but at the same time, Calvin Austin could also end up being the number 2 on this entire depth chart. Like they haven't really blocked anybody with what they've done. And to a degree, obviously, I would have liked to have seen a more talented player brought in to pair at the top of that. But for guys at the bottom, like in the middle and the bottom of this depth chart, this is a great opportunity for them.
Yeah. Yeah, you make a good point just about like not blocking opportunity. OTAs getting a lot of these guys are still young, right? Like we're talking about guys still in their 20s. So you're talking about getting a lot of young players, a lot of reps. And I think that that's always a good thing, especially when you're talking about bringing in 2 new quarterbacks, right? Getting that chemistry with Russell Wilson, getting
Yeah.
that chemistry with Justin Fields. And then, the opportunity is there for everybody. I mean, I just can't imagine, like from a player standpoint, there's so much open grass, open targets. snaps, all that stuff out there, I would imagine that everybody's extremely motivated. And NFL
Yeah.
players don't necessarily need more motivation, but when there's this much at stake, I just feel like that there's a potential for something to come out. I did think that I think that this has been talked about a little bit. I talked about it with Nick Herbig, Steelers now beat writer on here all the time. We talked about it. I think it was Thursday or Friday. He may have written a story, or maybe this was just an observation from him. But he said that Calvin Austin he looks a lot more improved in terms of snapping down and breaking in and out of his routes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's some good context because you got to think about it. Calvin was essentially a rookie last year because his rookie season got completely wiped out with the Liz Frank injury with the foot. But I think that there's a potential there that this another year removed from that and being fully confident in what his foot will allow him to do could help him improve, as a route runner. I think that was the big thing for me was when Calvin was coming out of Memphis. I mean, they had him playing as an X, like he was outside winning one-on-one. And I think that it was difficult to imagine him translating quickly to the next level because, I mean, now he's a historical outlier in terms of size, but he was a good route runner in college. Like he didn't run the full route tree. It's kind of basic, but he was a good route runner in college, could beat press. And that some of the things I think you saw last year was some struggles in terms of like breaking down. We talk a lot about, receivers being able to quickly accelerate, get to that top end speed, but equally important, if not more important, is how you decelerate and, come to your breaks and, kind of, especially on those like hitch routes or, any type of comeback, quick outbreakers, things like that. He really struggled kind of running those last year, even sometimes like even losing his footing. Some of that could have been the foot, or that's been a point of emphasis. I know for a fact for him in training this offseason. So I'm excited to see what that looks like, especially once we get pads on and we get some 7-on-7, some team drills and training camp, and also in preseason. So it's just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, certainly didn't box them out, like I said.
Yeah.
You mentioned the quarterbacks. Val here has a question about that. What's the best scenario for keeping Fields beyond 2024? How much do you think his contract will be if he sits all year? I mean, that's interesting. Like, what contract do you give a guy like that? Is it like a Jordan Love, where it's pretty much like just a bunch of escalators to get him to a quality starting quarterback's pay if he hits those, or like how do you structure something like that? I think that adds to the intrigue of the quarterback room this year. You sign a guy and trade for a guy, but they're both only here for 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's there's so much unknown, and there's no real way to answer it. Here's my question, though. Okay, I think that scenario of Fields sitting all year and then them bringing him back, that requires so many variables to work out in a very specific way. Because you got to think about it. If he sits all year, what does that mean? That means Russell Wilson played pretty well, right? So that probably means Russ is coming back as a starter, right? Or maybe Russ plays really well up until December, and then things kind of fall off the rails. He plays poorly over the last month. They see maybe another step in the decline and his athleticism to the point where they're like, hey, we just don't think he's a viable option going forward. Now, from Fields' perspective, if he doesn't play all year, you mentioned kind of the contract point, but what's in it for him in terms of coming back if he's a free agent?
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Because like you got to think if you're Justin, over the last 3 years, he's been a starter. He doesn't play at all this year. I'm sure in his mind, I mean, he's been very confident and open about the fact that he doesn't plan on sitting all year. So he thinks he's a starting caliber quarterback. Now the league clearly didn't view him that way because if they did view Justin as a starting caliber quarterback, he wouldn't be in Pittsburgh for a day 3 pick. You know what I'm saying? So that's another variable. Like, is he going to have other opportunities elsewhere? I struggle to see a situation where, say Russ plays all year. If Russ plays all year, he's either going to be the starter again in 2025, or if he plays all year and then struggles, they might want to go get a quarterback elsewhere.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. If you're talking about a Justin Fields that hasn't played at all in 2024 and a Russ that, fell off maybe at the end, like in the scenario you're playing out, what's to stop? I mean, my guess would be wipe their hands clean, go find another solution, like start over at the position.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I think is good. I mean, you can look at it either way, whether you're optimist or a pessimist, but you could look at it like that, saying that's kind of the cool thing about how this is going to work out, right? Like the Steelers have both these quarterbacks on 1-year deals, but there's no financial commitment to either of them. So say they're both and obviously we hope, and I don't necessarily think that this is the case. I'm cautiously optimistic that one of these two guys is going to give them baseline quarterback play to where they're going to be able to win some games. I don't know about the ceiling in terms of will they go further in the playoffs or anything like that, but I think that the good part of it is you've got both these guys 1-year deals. There's no financial commitment to them, so you can just move on. Like if things don't work
Yeah.
out, you look at it like, hey, we got 2 bites at the apple here. Neither of the bites hit. We just move on. We go find a quarterback in free agency. We go draft one next year, whatever that may be. But I'll just say it right now. I'd be surprised if we don't see Justin at some point this year. I mean,
Yeah, I
that
agree.
I think that a lot of people, like, I don't know how we got here. I guess maybe because I don't. Is it weird? Why are we seeing so much stuff about like a true quarterback competition recently? Is it just because like OTAs and like seeing Justin in a Steelers uniform? It's.
Mhm.
I don't think it's
Yeah, I
actually
mean,
gonna
he's
be.
physically more impressive. Like, yeah, I just think he's physically more impressive than
Yeah,
Russ is. And when you're talking about football and shorts, he's gonna pop more than Russ
sure, but
does.
do you actually think that this is like a legitimate quarterback competition? Like a 1-2 where Russ had, or let's just say like where Justin has a legitimate shot that he play. Let's just say all things are even. Justin has a better training camp. He has a better preseason. Do you believe he's a starter
I
week
think it'd
one?
have to be significantly better.
I do
Like,
too.
I
And
don't
that,
think it could be close
yeah,
and him win the job
yeah,
over like Russ would have to be very bad, Justin would have to be very good.
yeah, true. And like I look at it the same way. And another thing that I brought this up, Tyler, who I know listens to the pod and he supports a lot of my work, so I really appreciate it. But he gave a good question
How
about
about
this.
T-Wise?
Yeah, no, he's
Oh,
cool too, but I forget his last name.
Lovejoy?
No,
I'm
there's
just
another.
shouting out every Tyler now.
Yeah, I apologize, but he asked a good question in my mailbag about like Russ being in pole position, but what would it take for Justin to overtake him? And
Mm.
I think that you're right. It would take. That's kind of what I said. Russ is. It would surprise me if he's not the starter week one, but it's going to be difficult for Justin to overtake him because you think about you talk about the physical gifts and how just amazing he looks out there. Like he just. I mean, he's built like you would want a starting quarterback.
It's my guy Tyler Hurnley.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's it. But at the end of the day, the thing that Justin really has going for him is that he still has the top 0.01% athleticism at the position, one of the most gifted runners we've ever seen. Well, he's not gonna really get to show that in training camp. You know what I'm saying? Because you can't coaches don't want
Yeah.
quarterbacks running in training camp because they don't want those guys getting hit. Like you don't want unnecessary punishment on your passers. So he's not gonna be able to show that one thing that he really separates himself from Russ in camp and in preseason. We might see a little bit of it, but at the same time, I'm sure that they're going to probably want him to throw the ball in preseason because they think that that's really where he, needs to grow. But I think we're going to see him at some point. I just don't know. I don't know if I'm buying that it's a 100%. Like when I think quarterback competition, I think whoever plays the best in camp and in preseason is going to be the starter. And I don't truly believe that even if Justin is better, that he's going to play. I think it's like you said, I think he's going to have to be significantly better to play, which all of this is fine. Like I said,
Mhm.
I'm rooting for Russ. I can understand the reason and I understand the reason that Russ is in pole position. And I think that there is a very real scenario where he gives the baseline quarterback play. I just think at some point we're going to see Justin for one reason or another, and he'll get the opportunity to kind of write that narrative in terms of, okay, I'm a starter at the next level, or, he's going to have a chance to, maybe, either be a backup here next year or be a starter elsewhere, whatever have you. But I think he'll get the chance to play and, kind of, get another chance to prove himself.
Quarterback competitions rarely exist. I mean, to me, probably maybe last year with like Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi in New England, they had one. This
Yeah,
year, like looking around, the only one that I could maybe kind of see is Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. But like Gardner's the superior player, in my opinion,
sure,
got a 2-year contract. So I think he's going to be what they roll with. Like, so yeah, there's
sure.
just not situations around the league that I keep coming back to. I will say I thought about something as you were saying that talking though. And in Justin's situation, which you basically said was the league told them that they don't view him as a starter. Otherwise, he goes for something more and isn't in Pittsburgh.
Sure.
If he were to not play in Pittsburgh, so now we're talking about a guy that the league didn't view as a starter and now hasn't played in a year. Is he
Hmm.
going to have other offers to go elsewhere that are more enticing than at least competing in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think it would depend on what they did, right? Like if it, it's as I talk about like with the variables. I mean, you and I could, hypothetically throw out a bunch of different stuff. Say something crazy. Like I'm just going to say something crazy here that's not going to happen. But Dak Prescott's a free agent, right? So the Steelers go out and they sign Dak Prescott in free agency next
Jarrett
year.
Bailey and I talked about this exact same thing, by the way.
Okay, but why would Justin, if you're Justin,
yeah,
if you come back to Pittsburgh at that point, you are saying I'm a backup quarterback for the rest of my career or the rest of my athletic prime, because Dak is going to get a 3-4 year deal. He's going to get a 4-year deal, and it's going to be fully guaranteed, a boatload of money, and you're financially tied to him for the bare minimum of 2 to 3 seasons. So Justin's never going to play unless Dak were to get hurt or something like that. So that would be a scenario where I would say, okay, I'll just look around and I'll say like, okay, this team X, the Giants, I think Daniel Jones sucks. They're not in a position to go get a quarterback that I think is better than me in the draft. I'm going to go take my chances there. Or maybe it's he goes, I guess we can't really use Luke Getsy because I think that I think they've said the right things publicly, but I don't know if he would want to go join Vegas again with Getsy there. But maybe it's a situation where I go to
Saints?
a familiar coach. Yeah, or maybe something like that. Like, I think he would probably look elsewhere in that regard. But I do agree with you.
Yeah.
Like there is a scenario where he doesn't play at all and he looks around the landscape and the Steelers say, okay, we're not bringing back Russ, but we are going to keep our options open. And like, where it more points us to, they're probably going to draft a quarterback. Like this would also probably mean that the Steelers finish really, really poorly in the standings and they're in position to draft a quarterback, a better position than they were this year. Maybe he looks at it like that where, hey, I'm the incumbent. All I would have to do is fend off a quarterback in a weak draft class. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting how it all could play out. But I think the contract part of it, it doesn't really matter a ton to me personally. Like, I think that it would generate a lot of talking points. But here's kind of how I view like quarterback contracts. Is like, if you're really good, you're normally going to reset the market. And that just is what it is. I mean, you can find quote unquote value at every other position. Personally, like, I think it's good that the Steelers have Russ on a 1-year, like $1 million deal. But at the end of the day, quarterback is not the position that you want to be frugal with. Like, you're not looking for the best value at quarterback. Like, every NFL franchise is not sitting there saying like, oh, we can get good value here at this position. No, you get good value by going to find like an off-ball linebacker or a safety that can play in your scheme or something like that. At quarterback, you want the best player that you could possibly get in your system. So it just doesn't matter as much to me. If Justin ends up being a really good fit for Arthur Smith's offense, which I think he is, I'm interested to see what it would look like. But the contract part of it, it just doesn't. If they want him here, they'll make it happen. You know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah. And I don't think it's apples to apples with like the Jordan Love contract, because in that situation, they knew he was going to be the starter and they knew Aaron Rodgers was out already at that time.
Right.
In Fields, Justin's situation, at least as we sit here right now, like there's no guarantee that somebody else isn't going to be on the roster with him to compete for that starting job. So
yeah, I mean, and Love was a 3-year long-term plan. They invested a first-round pick in him. Justin, like you said, this is a dart throw. You're sending a day 3 pick to Chicago to see what you got.
A day 3 pick is, if you gave up a 6th round pick for a backup for a year, that happens all the time. Like that could legitimately just be what it is.
And if Justin turns into, a starter and they end up sending, I think there's conditions on it where it could turn into a 4th if he plays.
If he plays 51%, it's a 4th. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, again, who cares? If he's a starting quarterback and you believe in him and he plays even reasonably well or shows enough flashes to where he's the guy in 2025, maybe not on a long-term deal, but maybe they say like, okay, here's a short-term like prove it deal. They have some outs. There's not a ton of guaranteed money or whatever where they can make that work. 4th-round picks, nothing. Like at that point, in terms of finding your potential quarterback, your potential successor, a guy that can, lead this franchise, it's nothing. So I like the bet on Justin. I even understand the vision between what they did in the offseason in terms of acquiring Russell Wilson, acquiring Justin Fields. It's just there's so much unknown that I think any answer to the quarterback situation at Pittsburgh, if you're given a definitive take, I feel like either way, it just feels like you're guessing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just funny thinking back now, there was 1st round pick or 2nd round pick as compensation talk for Justin Fields at one point. We'll get to one more here and then we'll get out of here. Caleb said, any thoughts on new management under Con Weidel leaning more toward higher RAS scores in their prospect? Also, this is completely unrelated, but he got 2 questions here. Also, I think Herbig is consensus edge 3 among fans and the team itself, but do you think there's any plans to sign another edge for future depth?
Yeah, I mean, the first question was them drafting
Targeting
really.
high RAS guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I always think that you need a 2 to 3 year sample size to start really trying to identify trends. But I mean, we've already kind of
Mhm.
identified some, right? Like for one, they're going to prioritize the trenches a lot more than the previous, regime or that they did in the last couple of eras, right? Like it just you can already see that they traded up for Project Jones, they got Falatanu, they drafted Zach Frazier. I mean, they're spending a lot of capital and a lot of investment in that position. So I think that's already one trend. I think that the trend of drafting athletic players is notable. Something that I've noticed is they've drafted some older players. Like if you look at the ages of the guys that they
Yeah.
drafted the last 2 years, they've been older guys, experienced guys that have played a lot of ball. We talked about Peyton Wilson. I mean, that dude, he's 24 years old. He was
Mhm.
in college for 6 years. Even Fautanu was a older prospect. Rowan Wilson's played a lot of ball. He was a senior, so that could be something that's notable too. I mean, I always say that. I mean, there's people out there. Me and you talk about this a ton during draft time. There's a ton of people out there that say that athletic testing is the only thing that matters, and then there's some other people that say that the running and testing in shorts is so stupid. Here's the thing. It absolutely matters, like 100%. It's not the only thing that matters. Being a really good athlete doesn't make you a really good NFL player. But at the end of the day, like this is the best of the best, the truly best athletes in the world. So drafting really athletic players is a good thing. So it's a good thing. If the Steelers are leaning more in that direction, I think that's encouraging to me. So I think that would be a good observation. What was the second part of the question? About
It's
Nick
about
Herbig.
her. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Thinking that he is edge 3 among the fans and team,
Yeah.
but do you think that there are plans to sign another edge for depth?
Yeah, I actually wrote about this for the site about a week and a half ago. In terms of Herbig, I think he's ready for that edge third role. The fact that he wasn't completely overwhelmed against the run last year was encouraging to me. I think that you did see some passes or some flashes as a pass rusher as well. So he dominated last preseason. I think that he should be given the chance to earn the edge three role. I actually think it would be prudent for the Steelers organization to probably try to work in their backup edge rushers a little bit more than they have in the previous years. TJ Watt's going to be 30 years old this year. So getting
Mhm.
him down from playing 88% of the snaps, I think would be a good thing. But that's a different conversation. Now, do I think Herbig is enough to completely, just say that we don't need another edge guy or turn cheap edge help away? No, I don't think that that's the case. But could Marcus Golden come back again on a veteran minimum deal? Sure, but I
Would love that.
think
Yeah.
I think that if we're talking about how the depth chart should look, heading into camp, and then what I think it will end up looking like in week one is, he should be the first pass rusher off the bench for sure, regardless of
Yeah.
really who they bring in. And that's why it's not as big of a need, even if I would absolutely welcome, a cheap vet edge rusher, especially a guy who is good against the run or things like that. But curious on what you think about that because we haven't talked about that.
I am in full agreement. And here's my thing. Like, I would love to have Marcus Golden back. My thing with that is I almost feel like you need to have dress 5 edges on game day then, because if
You
you
know, for
want
special
Herbig
teams.
to be your number 3, which I would agree with, I don't know that you want him to have the special team snaps that he did last year as well. So you're going to need to find somebody else to take that load off. And is Marcus Golden going to play special teams in that capacity at his age? So that's where like there's a little bit, and it was the same conversation with Bud Dupree before he signed elsewhere when people were talking about that. Because I would have welcomed the signing back for edge depth. Obviously, still at 6.5 sacks last year, and he can play the run, but is he going to play special teams? And if not, I don't necessarily want to lump all the special teams reps on Nick Herbig when I'm trying to integrate him as the edge 3.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I honestly, in terms of the Dupree thing, I thought that if the Dupree thing would have materialized, I think he would have been edge three, just because you mentioned
Yeah.
Dupree he's still a
Mhm.
baseline starter in my book. Like I've watched it, I watched Atlanta enough last year to say like he's always been a very good run defender. I think that he is a solid complementary piece as a pass rusher, but and those guys typically don't, warrant like huge contracts like he got from Tennessee. Of course, the injury was really unfortunate with his career
But
development
that's the
path
thing is he got
like
paid
that.
after like the injury happened, he got paid right away after that.
Yeah,
That was
which I
wild
think
to me.
in hindsight, Tennessee does a lot of really questionable things. So, but yeah, it's one of those things where like I would welcome Golden coming back. I would welcome if some guy, we talked about the training camp cuts, some team ends up releasing a vet type of player who's maybe in a pinch could give you starting caliber reps, but maybe is no longer a guy that you want starting, in a 17 game season or sample size. I would welcome that to the room. I just in training camp in particular and through preseason, I want to give Nick Herbig as many reps as they possibly can. Because that's the thing, he dominated in preseason. And I think it was smart. Like none of us expected him to just come in and we didn't think he was, for one, there's not really a path to playing time. But we didn't expect that type of success to carry over when he was going up against starters. But I want him to get every single possible rep that he can, through the next couple months, man, because I want to see him get as much experience against really good competition. I want him to take starting reps in the preseason. And that's why, like, to me, bringing in another guy that's going to kind of block him, like kind of the conversation we had earlier about the receivers, I don't want that to happen just because I think that Herbig's so talented. And I think that the juice he has as a pass rusher is really worth investing in his development.
Yeah. So, I mean, could we see an awesome training camp from Jeremiah Moon to feel good enough about him being
Yeah,
the fourth
sure.
edge guy? Potentially. I mean, you want to talk about athletes, good enough athlete for sure to play at the spot.
100%.
How's he going to hold up and run? Does he have enough pass rush juice? We'll see. But I don't know. Maybe this is again like the conversation with the receivers. They're certainly not blocking him right now from making the 53.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So we'll see, but I think that they should certainly be open to adding at both those spots that we just talked about, receiver and edge. Derrick, we're going to get out of here. Tell the people they can find you.
Yeah, at Steelers_DB on Twitter and YouTube. Like we talked about earlier, Patrick Queen interviews up on the channel. You guys can go check that out. I was also just put out a video earlier today about just building the Steelers offense around Russell Wilson, around Justin Fields. So if you guys are interested in more quarterback talk in terms of, getting into some of the more intricacies of that side of the ball and, how Arthur Smith's going to have to scheme around those guys' strengths and weaknesses, be sure to check that out as well.
Been awesome stuff on the channel lately. Not that there wasn't always, but the last couple of weeks, Derrick had Pat Fryermuth on there breaking down film with him, which was obviously a very unique opportunity to do something like that. It was really cool on the channel. So go check that out as well. You can find me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here. Hit us in the comments for any questions, what you want to see on the channel. Alan will be going back to OTAs, obviously, so keep those coming. What players you want to know about? We've been having a lot of fun, literally taking what you guys say in the YouTube comments and having Alan take that to OTAs and get information for you guys. If you listen somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and subscribe over there. Until next time, for Derrick Bell and myself, thanks for jumping in, taking another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.